the twin suns of Haven cast their gentle golden light across crystalline cities that stretched toward the sky like frozen music. The Lumen had built their civilization with care, each structure designed to channel and amplify the natural harmonics of their world. Peace had reigned here for over 3,000 standard years, and the very concept of violence existed only in ancient historical texts that most considered outdated fiction. Elder Bright stood upon the highest spire of the central harmony, his luminescent skin pulsing with distress patterns that hadn't been seen for millennia. His large, dark eyes reflected the terror that had come from the void ships bearing the mark of the Void Raiders had appeared at the edge of their system mere hours ago. "The transmission has been sent to the Galactic Council," whispered his aide, young Shimmer, her voice trembling like leaves in a storm. "But the preliminary responses, they speak of political complications, resource allocation debates, and committee approvals. Commander, they estimate it could take weeks for any aid to reach us." Elder Bright's inner light dimmed. Weeks. The Void Raiders would need only days to strip Haven bare, enslaving or killing every Lumen they encountered. His people had no weapons, no military, no concept of organized violence. They were as defenseless as newlings before a predator. Meanwhile, millions of light years away, the Galactic Council chambers buzzed with heated debate. The Great Hall, a marvel of engineering that could accommodate beings of vastly different atmospheric and gravitational needs, had become a battlefield of words and politics. "The situation on Haven is regrettable," declared Ambassador Zephyr of the Altarian Confederacy, his 6 arms gesturing in dismissive patterns. "But our fleets are committed to the Outer Rim disputes. We cannot spare ships for every backwater planet that fails to maintain proper defenses." Ambassador Gray of the Council Mediation Corps stood, his elderly frame supported by his ceremonial staff. Unlike many of his colleagues, Gray had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. He understood that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of those willing to defend it. "Honored colleagues," Gray's voice carried across the chamber, silencing the murmurs. "The Lumen of Haven are requesting aid, not for conquest or expansion, but for survival against raiders who respect no law, no treaty, no boundary, while we debate beings who have harmed no one face extinction." "And what would you have us do?" snapped Representative Voss of the hegemony. "Send our children to die for people who cannot even defend themselves. Haven chose pacifism. Let them face the consequences of that choice." Gray's ancient eyes scanned the assembly. Representatives from 47 species, yet not one willing to act. Not one willing to risk their own interests for beings they considered weak and naive. "There is another option," Gray said slowly, his words causing the chamber to fall silent. "The humans." A collective intake of breath echoed through the hall. The humans, those strange, violent Deathworlders, who had only recently joined the galactic community. Most species considered them barely civilized, their planet a nightmare world of predators, natural disasters, and species that had evolved not just to survive, but to fight. "You cannot be serious," Ambassador Voss sputtered. "The humans, those barbarians who solve every problem with violence. You would unleash them on the peaceful Lumen, Siemtermadund." Gray straightened his voice, carrying steel. "I would give the Lumen their only chance at survival. The humans have one quality we seem to lack: they actually respond to distress calls." The debate raged for hours, but time was a luxury Haven didn't have. While diplomats argued, Gray took matters into his own hands. Through back channels and personal connections, he managed to transmit the Lumen distress call directly to Earth's military command. The response was immediate and utterly without bureaucratic delay. On Earth, Admiral Sarah Chen. No, Admiral Sarah Johnson received the transmission in her office overlooking the Pacific Fleet staging grounds. Unlike the endless committees and political maneuvering of the Galactic Council, Earth's military had streamlined its humanitarian response protocols after decades of disaster relief operations across their own war-torn planet. "How long until the nearest Council fleet can respond?" she asked her aide. "Preliminary estimates suggest 3 to 4 weeks, ma'am. The Council is still debating whether to authorize intervention." Admiral Johnson stood at her window, watching as a squadron of atmospheric fighters practiced low-altitude maneuvers. "And the raiders will strip that planet clean in less than a week." She turned back to her desk. "Prep the Nemesis. Full military expedition. I want them spaced in 12 hours. Ma'am, the Nemesis is our most advanced warship. Sending it could be seen as an act of aggression by the Council." Johnson's smile was sharp as her name suggested. "The Council had their chance to help. Now it's our turn. And after what happened to the colony at Kepler 442b, I'm done watching innocent people die while politicians debate." The call went out across Earth's military networks. Within hours, the warship Nemesis was loaded with supplies, weapons, and a full complement of Earth's most elite soldiers. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering, sleek, deadly, and incorporating lessons learned from humanity's long history of conflict. Captain Jason Rhee stood on the Nemesis's bridge as the ship made its final preparations for departure. At 35, he was young for a captain, but his service record spoke volumes. He had led peacekeeping missions in the Sirius sector, fought pirates in the asteroid belt rebellions, and commanded relief operations after the Titan mining disaster. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmission from the Galactic Council. They're advising us not to intervene." Rhee's jaw tightened. "Advising?" "Actually, sir, the exact words were strongly discouraging any human military action that could destabilize the region." "Note our response in the log," Rhee said calmly. "The Nemesis acknowledges Council transmission. We are proceeding with humanitarian mission as authorized by Earth Command. Message ends." As the Nemesis launched from Earth's orbital shipyards, news of the human response spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. Some species expressed relief that someone was finally acting. Others worried about the humans' reputation for bringing overwhelming force to every conflict. Ambassador Gray watched the departure through his private communication channels, allowing himself a small smile. He had fought in the wars that preceded the current peace, had seen species wiped out while committees debated. Sometimes the Council needed to be reminded that there were still those in the galaxy willing to act rather than simply talk. The journey to Haven took 4 days at maximum hyperspace velocity. During the transit, Captain Rhee studied everything available about the Lumen and their attackers. The Void Raiders were a loose confederation of pirates and mercenaries led by the brutal Commander Dusk. They specialized in attacking defenseless worlds, stripping them of resources and enslaving populations before moving on. The Lumen, meanwhile, were a puzzle to most military strategists. A species that had achieved faster than light travel, advanced energy manipulation, and had built cities that were works of art, yet had somehow retained their completely pacifist nature. They had no armies, no weapons more advanced than mining tools, and their police force was trained only in conflict mediation and crowd control. "It's admirable in a way," said Sergeant Major Alice Miller, as she reviewed the cultural briefings with her team. "Imagine never needing to hurt anyone." "It's also why they're about to be extinct," replied Corporal Rodriguez. "Sometimes peace isn't an option, it's a luxury you can only afford when someone else is willing to fight for it." Sergeant Major Miller had seen enough combat to know Rodriguez was right, but the idealist in her still hoped there might be another way. She was responsible for the ground team, 50 of Earth's finest Special Forces soldiers trained in everything from urban warfare to diplomatic protection. If they had to fight on Haven's surface, it would be her people doing the bleeding. As the Nemesis dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven system, the sight that greeted them was worse than their intelligence had suggested. The Void Raiders hadn't just sent a raid, they had brought a fleet. 12 warships surrounded Haven like vultures around a corpse, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Consensors called Lieutenant Davis from the tactical station. Raiders have established orbital blockade. I'm reading bombardment patterns on the surface. They're not just raiding, they're systematically destroying the major cities. Captain Reese stood silent for a moment, processing the tactical situation. The Nemesis was powerful, but 12-to-1 odds were problematic even for Earth's most advanced warship. However, the Raiders had made a critical error. They had assumed no one would come to Haven's aid, so their formation was optimized for planetary bombardment, not fleet combat. Combat stations, reordered. Signal the Raiders on all frequencies. Earth vessel Nemesis to Void Raider fleet. You will immediately cease all hostile actions against Haven and withdraw from this system. The response came quickly, a harsh laugh over the communications channel. Earth vessel, this is Commander Dusk. I've heard of your species, warlike primitives, who think violence solves everything. There are 12 of us and 1 of you. Withdraw now or be destroyed. Counteroffer. Ree replied calmly. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal, or I will show you why humans are called Deathworlders for a reason. What happened next entered Galactic Council military archives as the Haven Engagement. The Nemesis, rather than attempting to engage all 12 ships, simultaneously used its superior speed and advanced targeting systems to isolate individual ships. In 17 minutes of furious combat, the human warship disabled or destroyed 8 Raider vessels while sustaining only minor damage to its outer armor. The remaining 4 ships, including Commander Dusk's flagship, tried to use Haven's cities as shields, threatening to bombard population centers if the Nemesis didn't withdraw. It was a tactic that might have worked against Council species bound by rules of engagement and committee oversight. It didn't work against humans. Sergeant Major Miller, Captain Ree, said into his communication system, I'm putting you and your team down in the middle of their ground operations. Mission parameters neutralize Raider ground forces, protect civilian populations, and capture their command structure if possible. Understood, Captain. We're ready. The Nemesis's drop pods were another technological marvel that made other species nervous armored vehicles designed to punch through a planet's atmosphere and deliver troops directly into hot landing zones. 20 pods launched simultaneously, their heat shields glowing as they plummeted toward Haven's primary continent. On the surface, Elder Bright huddled with the remaining survivors in the deep shelters beneath the Central Harmony. The Void Raiders had been on the surface for 2 days, systematically looting anything of value and rounding up lumen for processing at slave camps. The concept of resistance hadn't occurred to most of his people. They literally lacked the mental framework for organized violence. The first sign that something had changed was when the bombardment from orbit suddenly stopped. Then came sounds the lumen had never heard before. Explosions, weapons fire, and the distinctive whine of human military aircraft conducting strafing runs. Sergeant Major Miller's pod had landed in the center of the Raider staging area, her team emerging into chaos. The Raiders, used to facing defenseless populations or council forces constrained by political considerations, found themselves confronting an enemy that fought like the very planet was trying to kill them. Contact Front called Specialist Thompson as his squad engaged a Raider patrol near a captured lumen processing center. The Raiders were well armed and numerous, but they had never faced opponents who treated every piece of cover as a potential fighting position and every engagement as potentially their last. The battle for Haven's surface lasted 18 hours. Human forces, vastly outnumbered, used superior tactics training and sheer aggression to systematically dismantle the Raider ground operation. They rescued thousands of captured lumen-destroyed Raider equipment stockpiles and established a perimeter around the major population centers. Commander Dusk, watching his carefully planned raid falling apart, made a fatal error born of desperation. He brought his flagship down into the planet's atmosphere, intending to personally oversee the capture of Elder Bright and the remaining Lumen leadership. He believed that using the Lumen's own leaders as hostages would force the humans to negotiate. He had fundamentally misunderstood the species he was dealing with. Captain Ree. receiving word of Dusk's landing made a decision that would be debated in military academies for decades. He took the Nemesis into atmosphere, something ship captains were expressly told never to do, except in the most extreme circumstances. The sight of the massive human warship descending like an angry god toward Dusk's landing site shattered whatever morale the remaining raiders possessed. The final confrontation took place in the ruins of Haven's Grand Library, where Dusk had established his command post. Elder Bright, held captive but unharmed, watched in amazement as Sergeant Major Miller and her team stormed the building. "You're making a mistake, human," Dusk snarled as Miller's soldiers surrounded him. "Kill me, and my ships will glass this entire continent." "Your ships are scrap metal," Miller replied calmly, "and you're under arrest for piracy, slavery, and crimes against sentient beings." As Dusk was led away in restraints, Elder Bright approached Sergeant Major Miller. This was the first time any Lumen had seen a human up close, and he was struck by how much they looked like warriors even in their moment of victory, alert, ready, dangerous. "Thank you," he said simply, his bioluminescent skin pulsing with patterns of gratitude. "But I must ask, why did you come? Why risk your lives for people you've never met?" Miller removed her helmet, revealing a scarred face that had seen too much combat but retained its humanity. "Because someone had to, and because leaving you to die would have been wrong." The aftermath of the Haven engagement sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. The humans had not only responded to a distress call ignored by the rest of the galaxy, but had done so with an effectiveness that forced many species to reconsider their assumptions about the violent primitives from Earth. Representatives who had dismissed human military capabilities now requested detailed briefings on their tactics and technology. The efficiency with which a single human ship had dismantled a raider fleet convinced several border worlds to request Earth protection, rather than waiting for Council bureaucracy. Ambassador Gray found himself vindicated but concerned. The humans had proven their point dramatically, but their methods had also created new political complexities. Some council members now feared humans as much as they appreciated their effectiveness. Captain Ree spent 3 days on Haven's surface, overseeing the transition of security to a hastily assembled coalition of council peacekeeping forces. During that time, he witnessed something unprecedented, the beginning of a transformation in Lumen society. Elder Bright accompanied Ree on his final tour of the capital city before departure. The reconstruction had already begun, but changes were visible beyond mere repair work. Some Lumen were asking questions about self-defense, about the responsibilities that came with freedom. "Your species has given us much to consider," Elder Bright admitted, as they watched human engineers working alongside Lumen architects to rebuild the city's defense grid. "We have lived so long in peace that we forgot peace must sometimes be protected." "Peace isn't the absence of conflict," Ree replied. "It's the presence of those willing to defend it. But that doesn't mean you have to become warriors. It means you need to understand that others in this galaxy will fight for what you've built." 3 months later, a formal ceremony was held in the rebuilt Central Harmony. Elder Bright stood before his people and the assembled representatives of 8 different species, including a full diplomatic delegation from Earth. "For 3,000 years, we Lumen lived in peace by avoiding all conflict," he began, his voice carried across the crystal structures by harmonic amplifiers. "We believed that by refusing to fight, we could live free from violence. We learned that we were only free from violence because others faced it for us." He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the gathered crowd. "Today we establish the Haven Defense Force, not to make war, but to ensure that peace remains a choice, not merely a surrender to whatever power decides our fate. We have learned from our human friends that strength and compassion need not be enemies, that the willingness to fight can spring from the desire to protect rather than the urge to conquer." The crowd's bioluminescent response created a visual symphony of agreement, hope, and determination that had never before been seen in Lumen society. Ambassador Gray, now nearing retirement, watched the ceremony from the diplomatic gallery. Beside him sat Admiral Johnson, who had traveled personally to Haven to oversee the establishment of the new defense pact between Earth and the Lumen worlds. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Gray asked quietly. Johnson considered the question as she watched young Lumen learning tactical procedures from human instructors, their natural grace adapting surprisingly well to combat movements. "They'll be fine," she said finally. "They've learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy, that peace isn't a gift you receive, it's something you earn and keep earning every day." Below them, Captain Rhee was conducting his final briefing with Sergeant Major Miller and Elder Bright. The human forces would be departing soon, leaving behind a small advisory group and a promise of support should Haven ever again face external threats. "What will you do now?" Elder Bright asked Rhee. "Return to Earth resupply and wait for the next distress call," Rhee replied. "There are a lot of worlds out there, and not all of them can defend themselves. And if the Council objects to your interventions—" Rhee's smile was sharp but not unkind. "The Council can object all they want. We'll keep responding to those who need help. That's what humans do." As the Nemesis departed, Haven orbit its mission complete, the story of what happened there spread throughout the galaxy. On 100 worlds, beings who had never heard of humans began to understand why Earth's diplomacy was backed by such unwavering military resolve. The Void Raiders, their leadership captured or killed, and their fleets scattered, never again dared to threaten a world under human protection. Commander Dusk, serving multiple life sentences on a council prison world, became a cautionary tale among pirates and raiders about the dangers of underestimating primitive humans. But perhaps the most significant change was on Haven itself. The Lumen had not abandoned their peaceful nature. If anything, they had refined it. They now understood that true peace required vigilance, strength, and the wisdom to know when force was necessary to protect the innocent. Years later, when other species faced similar crises, they found themselves with new allies. The Lumen had learned to combine their natural diplomatic skills with a newfound understanding of security and defense. They became mediators and peacekeepers, working alongside humans to ensure that distress calls didn't go unanswered. Elder Bright, in his final years, would often stand on the observation deck of the rebuilt Central Harmony and watch as mixed crews of humans and Lumen patrolled the system. The sight still amazed him, two species who seemed so different working together, each contributing their strengths to protect what they both valued. The SOS that reached the Deathworlders had indeed brought a dangerous ship. It had brought the most dangerous thing the Void Raiders could have imagined, a ship full of beings who would fight to protect strangers, who would risk everything to ensure that innocence was not trampled by those who confused weakness with worthlessness. And in the end, that dangerous ship had delivered the most precious gift imaginable, the chance for peace to survive and grow protected by those willing to fight for it. The galaxy was a safer place because when someone called for help, the humans came. Not with words or committees or political maneuvering, but with ships and soldiers and the absolute conviction that some things were worth fighting for. The Nemesis had returned to Earth, but its legacy remained among the stars, a promise that no cry for help would go unanswered, no matter how far the call had to travel or how dangerous the mission might be. After all, humans had learned long ago on their own war-torn planet that freedom, peace, and safety weren't gifts graciously bestowed by the universe. They were treasures that had to be earned, defended, and sometimes paid for in blood. And they were willing to pay that price, not just for themselves, but for any being in the galaxy who shared their values and needed their help. The stars themselves seemed brighter after Haven, as if the universe had remembered that sometimes the greatest mercy came not from those who preached peace from safety, but from those who fought for it in the darkness between worlds. And on Earth, in military academies and training centers across the globe, a new generation of officers learned about the Haven engagement, understanding that their ancestors' legacy was not one of conquest or domination, but of standing ready to answer the call when civilization needed defenders. The motto carved above the entrance to the Earth Defense Force Academy seemed more relevant than ever: in strength protection, in protection peace. The galaxy had learned what humans already knew, that peace was not the reward for avoiding conflict, but the result of being strong enough to prevent it. And should another SOS reach the Deathworlders, they would once again send not aid, but a dangerous ship full of dangerous people, willing to do dangerous things to protect those who could not protect themselves. Because that's what humans did. That's what they were. And the galaxy was better for it.